I have been obsessed with Billy Joel from a very young age. And you know, I knew even back then that Billy Joel like wasn't cool, but cool has never been the point with Billy Joel. And so if that's your barrier to entry, I'm just going to say like drop that. Just drop it and keep an open mind and heart, okay? If you think he's not for you. So when I was maybe 8 years old, I discovered my dad's copy of the Billy Joel album, The Stranger. And I didn't know it was my dad's. I just instantly knew between my mom and him, it was my dad's. My dad was the one who, of the two of them, like they were both really good looking, charismatic people, but my dad was like the cool one. And he had really, really interesting, esoteric, eclectic, deep, interesting taste in all kinds of music. And my mom, like not so much. Like my mom loved like she loved like top 40, and she loved like, my dad would like be like, oh, your mom, like she's got a crush on like Kenny Rogers. Like, isn't that cute? And he meant it in like an affectionate way. He wasn't mocking her, but they did not share musical taste, and my dad, meanwhile, would like I would be interested in like how he got to the artists he got to. And he would tell me stories about like how he got into the Doors when he was in the jungle in the Vietnam War. He was a Kennedy Democrat who became a Reagan Republican. Fascinating guy. Anyway, so I found this copy of The Stranger with its cover art and the track list, and immediately I got the concept. And it was so compelling to me. Now, of course, at that age, I knew nothing about Carl Jung and the concept of the shadow self, or the Albert Camus novel of the same name. But I knew even back then, and maybe because my parents, really it was they were complicated people, that like there was a public face that most of us, or all of us, really don, and then there's a private one. And what makes everyone it's a universal theme, right? And I sensed even then that my dad definitely, that this album spoke to him for a very profound reason. Now, as I later learned, and I'm thinking I will eventually write about this someday. I learned at his funeral, which was only like a year and a half ago, that why that album spoke to him so much. And it's really not a cliche reason that you might think. Like he wasn't living like the kind of like double life of like achiever novel. It's nothing that cliche. I mean, it was profound. It was something that would be considered a true sin, and it was something he took to his grave. And then I was told about it. It just slipped out of a close relative's mouth during a conversation with me, and it clicked like that. And so that is to say, I connect to Billy Joel on a lot of levels. He is also a fellow Long Islander. I connect to a lot of it. I didn't know, and none of us really knew a lot about him until this new HBO documentary, which dropped about him over the weekend. And it's fascinating. It is fascinating. And I was so interested in what we would learn and what he would be willing to talk about, because back in 2011, Billy Joel had a memoir that was about to hit the shelves. It was about 2 months out from publication. So it's about to go to the printer. Galleys would have been made, you know? And Billy had like a $3 million book advance. So today it would be closer to like 7, 8. And he pulled the plug at the last minute. And so right then I thought like, okay, like deep guy, way more complicated than his later work, would ever let on. And some of it is admittedly terrible. I cannot stand a song like We Didn't Start the Fire. Guess what? Neither can Billy. He won't play it anymore. He says himself, the melody is terrible. He's compared it to sounding like a dentist drill. But we're going to push that aside. Let's go to Billy and his childhood. This is the first time we get a real window into it. And it's so fascinating and poignant. And you see pictures of him as a kid, and you're just, anyway, I'll let him speak for himself. He was an obvious child prodigy. Everybody knew it. He was teaching himself classical music on the piano by ear as a child, okay? Here he talks about his father, who was also a musician, a frustrated one, his mother, who was also a singer, and then himself as this like burgeoning prodigy, and what that got him at home. Take a look.
He came down the stairs, bam! I got whacked. And I got whacked so hard, he knocked me out. I was unconscious for like a minute.
So Billy was, I think, 11 at that time. Imagine that. Like, even the way he's telling it, it's so generational. I mean, today you would call the cops and have the father arrested for, I wouldn't even call that a smack. I would call that a punch. Knocking out a kid, playing the piano so hard he is knocked out cold for at least a minute. So Billy's father left the family when Billy was about that age, 11. Here is his sister Judith talking about their mother.
We knew that there was something very wrong, that she was most likely bipolar. We didn't know the word at the time.
And then Judy talks about how she and Billy, now in this fatherless house, the relief is not what one would think, because they have to constantly be on alert for her wild mood swings.
There wasn't peace because we knew that we had to walk on eggshells, that anything could throw her off.
So Judy says she thinks they were bipolar. Based on that thumbnail description, I'm going to suggest that she may have been a borderline. And we are doing a borderline segment. It's planned for the next episode, The Borderline Mother. So, of course, difficult mother, difficult father. Now, as a child, of course, Billy was different. Of course he was. Let's look at this description of what life was like for Billy on suburban Long Island.
The piano teacher lived right down the block from where my house was. She also taught ballet. And there were a couple of guys in the neighborhood that used to call me out. Hey, Billy, where's your tutu? He'd knock the books out of my hand and smack me.
If you're just listening, I would say go look at these clips on this episode of The Nerve, because Billy Joel, who has got to be around 70, 72, I think, in telling this story, look at his body language. And even he puts his hand over his head, and it's almost like he's trying to push the memory back in and then like just make it sort of pass through him. And he's got just little tells in his demeanor that like this still makes him feel very uncomfortable, that because he was a boy who leaned towards the arts, that these other kids were like calling him gay, basically. And it was humiliating for him. And, you know, you've got to give, like, this is how you know you're dealing with a true artist. Billy, rather than try to fit in with these kids and quit going to the piano teacher who also taught ballet or dance, he stays true to his own inner compass. He stays true to his own North Star. And again, this is so hard to do as a child, when the easier thing is to just try to fit in and be like everybody else. And that is why my heart has always been with the outcasts and the misfits and the ones who see and experience the world differently, because they usually grow up to contribute something of more value than the kids who are knocking the books out of another kid's hands, who's just trying to get to his piano lesson. Here's more on the young Billy from his sister Judy.
He didn't like school very much. He would get dressed and he would then wait till my mother pulled the car out and went to work, and he would go back into the house, and he would then go up into my closet and he'd bring books and a pillow and a flashlight.
Imagine that, you know, I mean, I always wondered about Billy as a reader because of his facility with words and the way he tells stories in his songs, and how vividly his characters are specifically depicted, and how they have dialogue with each other in a song, and how they also have a plot that moves. And now we know, yes, little Billy was a big, voracious, avid reader, and he took solace in books. And just the image of him waiting for his mother to drive off to work and then go back inside and change out of his school clothes because he couldn't obviously tell his mother that school was a torment for him. It's the whole thing is so poignant. So we're going to smash cut now to Billy's young adulthood. And he falls in love with his best friend's wife. I believe they were married. And Billy gets together with the wife. Her name is Elizabeth. And then they split up. So now he's lost his best friend and the girl who he lost his best friend over. And Billy falls into such deep depressions that he tries to commit suicide, not once, but twice. So here's what Billy had to say about trying to kill himself. Quote, "I was just in a lot of pain." And I'm reading this because there's music under this. We can't show it for that reason. He says, "Why hang out? Tomorrow's going to be just like today, and today sucks. So I thought I'd just end it all." He tries to commit suicide twice. He survived both attempts, the final one just barely. And then he institutionalizes himself, which had to take a lot of guts. And it shows an impulse to live. And as he tells it, he stays in the institution for 2 weeks. He realizes he's not nearly as bad off as the people in the institution. And the way he talks about it, he says he runs out that front door and he runs away from that building and he never looks back, and he makes the decision he's going to put it all into his art, all into his music. And even the people in this documentary who know and love him best say that Billy can't go deep in conversations. He goes deep in his music. That's where it comes out. And this is where I think Billy Joel has been underestimated by the culture. I think he's never really been fully given his due because he's not a cool guy like a Mick Jagger or a Bono or a Springsteen, and that's not a fair metric. It's not. And by the way, the Bruce Springsteens of the world and the other music legends of the world, they're in this documentary, younger, older, all paying fealty and giving praise to the one and only Billy Joel. Again, Billy, as a reader and a writer, they talk about how he put together with I think it was his producer, Phil Ramone, Scenes from an Italian Restaurant, which is an epic song. It is one of the unlikeliest pop hits ever. Now, from a production standpoint, Billy talks about, I think Phil, I don't know if we have him talking about this as well, but these were like 3 to 5 separate different song fragments that he had been working on. And Phil Ramone figured out the solution is we put them all together. And Billy says, the song changes, the time signature changes in the middle of it, which is an extremely complicated thing to do. So just from a musical standpoint, it's a unicorn. And then from a lyrical standpoint, so Billy says he was writing about 2 people in the song. They're named Brenda and Eddie. They are the king and the queen of the prom. And he tells us he had always wanted to write a song about people who peaked too early. And those we all know are the people in high school who, when you're in high school, you think they have everything and the road ahead for them must be like paved with gold. But these people often peak too early. And that is the young misfit in Billy having his own eureka moment. Now, none other than Bruce Springsteen, who talks about them, he and Billy both being bridge and tunnel artists. And I mentioned this on an earlier episode of The Nerve, and I relate to this sentiment as a fellow Long Islander. You're from Long Island, you're from New Jersey, you're drawn to the city like a magnet as a kid, but you're taking the train or a car over a bridge or in the tunnel, you're a bridge and tunneler. And that gives you a very different look at urbanity and New York City and the arts, because you're not of it. You want to be of it and you admire it, but you also have a bit of a gimlet eye, a bit of a cynicism towards it. So here is what Springsteen says about Billy as a storyteller, and I quote, Billy's songs are built like the Rock of Gibraltar. They are simply incredibly well put together. And one of Billy's gifts was his ability as a great storyteller. He goes on to say that earlier in his career, Billy was misunderstood, which is kind of a shame because they really misperceived the value of some of his greatest work. Yes, yes, it goes to that cool factor I was talking about. Now, in reviewing this doc, John Anderson at the Wall Street Journal does not get it. First of all, he says, who doesn't feel like an outcast at age 13? You know what, John? A lot of people don't. The kids who were knocking the books out of Billy's hands were not the kids who were suffering. I didn't feel like a lot of kids my age either. It's not that unusual. Secondly, in talking about Piano Man, one of Billy's most autobiographical songs, and they talk about the backstory in this documentary, John says of a character named Paul in the song, the line in the song is, Paul is a real estate novelist. John says, or asks rather, what in the world is a real estate novelist? That always seems so obvious to me. Paul is what we would now call a broker. That's his day job. He's a realtor. Sorry, we call him a realtor. And in his off hours, he dreams of becoming a published author and a literary lion. And so he's writing a book in his spare time. And the tragedy of it is it's never going to be published, but the dream keeps him alive. John, dial into your inner artist. Try it. Okay, now, the other great illuminating part of this documentary goes to Billy's ex-wife, Elizabeth, who becomes the brains behind Billy Joel Inc. That is a whole other conversation. The way in which Elizabeth was treated by a male-dominated music industry, a male-dominated media. They always depicted her as like a viper, and like it's a different story that she tells and that Billy tells and the other members of his band tell. But anyway, so Billy wrote many, many songs about Elizabeth, among them Just the Way You Are. That song wound up on The Stranger. Now, Billy goes to the record company and Elizabeth is there and they play The Stranger for all the execs and it resounds with a thud. They don't get it. And they're like, there's not a hit here and we don't even really want to put this thing out. And Elizabeth's like, over my dead body. She says, you pick a single and that'll go first. And then I'll pick the second single. And the first single, fine. Elizabeth's pick, Just the Way You Are, monster hit. Billy hated the song. He hated it. He wanted to take it off the record. He says it's a cheesy wedding song. Elizabeth was like, And many other people feel otherwise, including, as he says in this documentary, the one and only Paul McCartney, who says of And Just the Way You Are, I get asked all the time, is there a song you wish you had written? And that is the one I always say. And Billy, to his credit, says, I wouldn't know a hit single if I stepped on it. It's not my talent. That's a real artist who's really in it, can't really see the bigger thing or the outside thing. Anyway, and then they talk about Big Shot, which is like that song about, it's set in the 70s or 80s, and it's like a female character in the back of a limousine who's wearing a Halston dress, detail from the song. So it's not Billy, as he likes to claim. I think he's trying to take the heat. It's not Billy. Halston dress, talking about everybody she knew at Elaine's and doing all the cocaine and waking up with bloody eyes and a monster hangover. And like, you just had to impress everybody last night and you made a fool of yourself. And he's like, it's not about Elizabeth. And Elizabeth's like, I think it's about Billy. But I always heard, as many people have always heard, that it was really about Bianca Jagger, which is a far better theory of the case. I think it's Bianca Jagger. Then finally, he talks about, they all talk about You May Be Right. Now, I think right before this song, Billy was he was getting to exactly where he had been working so hard to go, which is commercial success, critical success, money, fame, all of it. So Elizabeth's son, Stephen, is in the film, and he's like, at a young age when Billy's in his life. He's maybe around 11. There's some mirroring here. Billy at 11, Stephen at 11, the fatherless boy. Stephen says this was a really exciting time because we were all so happy for Billy. He was getting everything he had worked so hard for. But it was also very scary because we knew we were going to lose him to fame. And Stephen was right. And so at the same time, Billy's going to bars on his motorcycle, riding his motorcycle all over town. And the insurance company is like, stop riding motorcycles. It's too dangerous. His wife is like, stop it. It's too dangerous. He comes home one night after driving from a bar to the house in the rain. And she says to him, you're going to kill yourself. What are you doing? And he says to her, well, look at me. I came home in one piece. So I'm proving you wrong. And she says to him, only an insane person would say that, let alone think it. Lo and behold, not long after that, Billy gets in a calamitous motorcycle accident. He says he should have been killed. He should have been dead. He winds up in surgery, harms his head and his hands. His hands are mangled. They don't know if he's got brain damage. The storyteller, the piano man, is it a coincidence that he endangered the two very things that are responsible for his gifts? So I don't remember in the chronology when he had written You May Be Right, but that song, he says, came out of that argument with Elizabeth about driving drunk on his motorcycle in the rain. There's a literal line in that song. I drove my motorcycle in the rain. And Elizabeth says when she looked at the lyrics for that song and saw the couplet, turn out the lights, don't try to save me, she knew that was it. She had to leave. He was telling her, don't try to save me. And she goes. And that's the end of part one. It's quite a cliffhanger.